Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, let's check out 5 filters that have the power to transform any image you throw at them. Whether it's macro, landscape, wildlife, portraiture, you name it, you can use any of these filters for fast style and quick fixes. So without further ado, let's dive right in and check out these filters. So inside of Photo RAW here, let's use these 5 filters on a landscape image first. From there, we'll move on to 4 other different types of images, and we'll apply these 5 filters, and I'll show you just how amazing they are at bringing life into any photograph that you're adjusting. So with our landscape here, before we get into the effects tab and we start adding filters, I'm just going to do one thing in develop. I'm going to go into my tone and color pane. I'm going to use this camera profile menu, and I'm just going to choose ON1 neutral. And I really enjoy ON1 neutral for just bringing out these middle grays within the scene and some of these shadowy areas that I couldn't really see before. So if we hit the backslash key on the keyboard, we're just quote unquote neutralizing the scene a bit and bringing out some of these darker areas that were a little bit too shadowed up before. So now that we've modified that camera profile, let's head into the effects tab here and let's get started with these filters. So the first filter I want to apply to the scene is one that brings out detail and texture. I can see in here that I have this mountain region, I have some trees, and then I also have this person in a boat here. And I'd like all of those things to be nice and textured and detailed so that they pop out within the frame. And so to achieve that, we're going to apply the dynamic contrast filter. The dynamic contrast filter is one of the probably most used filters inside of Photo RAW. It brings out texture, it brings out detail, and you can make things really stand out within the scene by using it. So let's go into the effects tab, we'll add a filter, and we have dynamic contrast right here. Now with dynamic contrast, if we read the description, it says dynamic contrast adds clarity, also known as tonal contrast, to your photo, making it pop. So we can use that again to just bring out those details and textures in the scene and make things stand out in the frame. But before we apply that here, let's actually make sure we're applying it to the areas that we want it to be masked onto. So we're going to head over to this Apply with Mask To section, and I'm going to go down to Flora, Natural Ground, Mountain, People, and Transport. You can see over here in blue, it's showing me that those areas are selected and that mask is going to be applied to it, and that dynamic contrast will then make these areas stand out. So let's choose dynamic contrast there. In dynamic contrast here, I'm going to go into this filter, and within dynamic contrast, there's these 3 different presets up top. Natural is a pretty mellow dynamic contrast, but it does bring out a lot of the texture and detail within those areas. There's also soft, which is pretty similar to natural, but it mainly brings out the larger areas of contrast. And then we have surreal. Now surreal is a really intense sort of bit of contrast there, and if we turn this off and on, it's really doing a whole lot to make those areas pop. But within dynamic contrast, we also have this tone section that you can use to bring out different tonal areas as well. So with surreal here, you can see that it's pulling up on the shadow tones, it's increasing those highlights, and it's also adding in vibrance. And if I turn that off and on here, you can see it's really applying a lot of that look to those different areas within the scene. Well, one thing I like to do with dynamic contrast is I like to hold down the J key on the keyboard. That way I can see all of the true white and true black that it adds into the photo. And I can see up here that it's sort of blowing out these whites within the snow. So I'm just going to pull back on the opacity there until it just fits the look of the scene a bit better. Remember that with all of these filters and adjustments inside of Photo RAW, you can always modify that opacity to adjust the strength. But still, even at 84 there, if I turn that off and on, it's really doing a whole lot to bring out that detail in the photo. So what I'm going to do now here is I want to modify the look of the water. We've modified the person in the boat, this rocky area there, and then the mountain section in the background. We now have this foreground water section to modify now. To modify the water, I'm actually going to use one of my favorite filters of all time, and that filter is the glow filter. And the glow filter is great for bringing out a soft, sort of blurry haze into the scene, and it works wonders on water. So let's add a filter. I'll head to water, and let's use glow. Inside of the glow filter, just like dynamic contrast and all of the other filters in Photo RAW, there's these different presets that I can use to modify the look of this particular filter. Now we also have this more menu here that contains other styles if you're looking for more than just the 3 here. But inside glow, I really like this darker style there. And if I turn this off and on here, I really enjoy what it does to the water. Again, it just brings in a nice, soft, sort of hazy blur into those areas. So we've added on dynamic contrast and we've added on glow here. The next thing I want to modify in the scene is the sky section. To do that, I'm going to pull in one of my other favorite filters of all time, the color enhancer filter. The color enhancer filter is great for modifying specific colors within your image, especially if you're dealing with varied color tones such as greens, blues, yellows, reds, and they're all sort of mixed in with each other. Let's go into Effects. Let's add a filter, and let's go into the color enhancer filter here. With color enhancer, it's very similar to the color section of your Develop tab, but below that color modification section, we can also target individual color ranges. So with color enhancer, I'm going to use one of these preset styles. I really enjoy just that sky option. Again, we want to modify that sky. So let's choose sky. And you can see with that sky there, it's going into these blues in the color range. It's boosting the saturation, and it's also dimming them down a bit so that we can see a little bit more of that detail in the sky section. Now keep in mind that with color enhancer here, we haven't actually masked it into a specific region, so it's actually applying itself to the entirety of the photo. Well, I'm really enjoying what it's doing to the foreground section and even the sky there, but it's sort of cooling the mountain down a little bit too much. So let's go into the masking options here. We'll use our Mask AI menu. Let's choose that mountain section, and let's just choose Paint Out. And then with Apply there, it will remove that color enhancer from that specific area of the scene. Now with the color enhancer, I'd also like to modify a little bit of these greens and yellows within the trees and the foliage there. So let's go into the color enhancer filter, and let's go back down to that color range, and let's grab those specific colors. I'll use green here. Let's just boost the saturation a little bit, and maybe the brightness a hair. Same thing with yellows, boost the saturation a bit, and then the brightness. And if we zoom in over here into the moss and then those trees, and we turn off color enhancer, you can see it's doing a whole lot to revive that color and the look of the foliage and that moss. So with the entire photograph here, if we turn this off and on, I'm just really enjoying what it's doing. Now remember, with any of these filters or adjustments, you can always lower the opacity if it's looking a little bit too intense. And with demoing this, I may make it a little bit intense, but that's just because I want you to see the before and after. But remember, you can always readjust to fine tune for your photograph. So we've gone over the first 3. Dynamic contrast. Remember, dynamic contrast brings in nice texture and detail into those specific areas that you want to stand out in the frame. We then have the glow filter, which brings in a nice, soft, sort of hazy blur. It's really great for water and even clouds in some situations for just making things a bit more interesting and a bit more dreamy. We then have color enhancer. And the color enhancer is really great for modifying specific color ranges and tones within the photograph. So we've modified the water, our mountain, and the sky here. Let's now go in and modify maybe the image as a whole with one of my other favorite filters, the photo filter. So let's add a filter and let's head down to photo filter. So with photo filter here, if we read the description, it says recreates traditional solid color lens filters used for warming and cooling effects, as well as gradient, bicolor, and center spot filters. So basically we're using the photo filter here to recreate lens filters that we've placed on our camera. So let's choose that there. And with photo filter, inside of this modifying section here, we have filter type and we have 4 different filter types. Let's just go over this first one, solid. With solid here, it's going to take the color, whatever color you choose, which you can just modify by selecting this section, and you can adjust the color there, or you can adjust it with this amount slider. With solid, we can also modify the amount here, which is going to adjust the strength of that filter. And then below that, we have saturation, which is going to increase the color saturation in the scene. And then below that, we have polarizer. And polarizer is basically going to increase the contrast within the photo. So that was solid. Remember, it just takes this color that you've chosen and it filters it onto the image and blends it in with the scene, depending on what you've modified down here. Let's talk about the next option here, graduated. With graduated, it's going to place a color into a specific side or bottom or top section of your scene, and then it's slowly going to taper off into the other section of your photo. So to demonstrate that, let's just pull up on the amount all the way here. And you can see that it's really quite strong up top here, but then it slowly graduates down into that bottom section where it weakens and then we can't even see it. Now we can also modify the position of any of these other 3 types by heading down to the bottom of the filter, and this position section is where we can adjust where the colors are positioned. You can then modify the distance. You can rotate it if you need to. And you can also modify the transition if you need to get a little bit more specific than these presets. So that's graduated. Remember, it places a specific color into either the right, left, bottom, top, or you can even rotate it, but then it tapers off as it leads itself into the other areas of your scene. Let's now talk about bicolor. With bicolor, it's going to take 2 colors and it's going to place them again into 2 different sections of your photo. The bottom, the top, the left, the right, and again, you can also rotate it to have it on the corners as well. So to demonstrate that, let's just choose sort of a warm color and then a very sort of blue color here. And so you can see we have our 2 color options. We have this color 1 and color 2. And it's the same thing as if you had solid. You can just choose the color by selecting the color option there, or you can modify the hue. So with the bicolor section here, let's go down to our position. And again, we can use these presets here to adjust where it's positioned. But we can also use these other 3 sliders here to modify and really fine tune it. There's a 4th option here, which is center. With center, let me just actually change this color here first. With center, it's going to either protect the center of your photograph from the filter being applied to it, or it's going to apply that photo filter to the center and then protect the edges. So to demonstrate that, we have our warm color here. Again, we can modify that with the color or the hue slider. But if we modify this position section here and we head down to this edges menu, we can either choose to use the photo filter on the edges of the scene, or we can have it applied to the actual center of the photograph. And again, you can always modify the other sliders within that position section to fine-tune how it looks within your photo. So with the photo filter here, now that you know about the different filter types, one thing I would recommend doing is going into this More menu, just hover over that first style there, and then just use your arrow keys to sort of arrow down and see what looks great on that specific photograph that you're adjusting. One of my favorites for landscapes is this orange. If we select that, brings in a nice warm color into the scene, and it gives quite a bit of an amount there. And if we turn this off and on, really great for just warming up cooler landscapes and bringing in a little bit more of that summer feel. Another one of my favorites is this skylight option. With skylight, if we check out this filter type, it's using solid, but instead of using a bright color, it's actually just using sort of a light gray there. Now with that, it's actually going to increase the brightness within the scene. So if we turn up on the amount here, you can see we're actually brightening things up rather than bringing in a specific color tone. So this can be really helpful if you're just looking to illuminate a specific area of your scene. So let's say I'm just looking to modify that foreground and bring in a little bit more life. I can use that photo filter option. I can use that skylight preset there, and I can bring in a little bit more brightness into the photo. Now remember, with photo filters or any of these effects and local adjustments, you can easily mask and place that adjustment into where you need it to be. So for instance, I don't want this applied to the sky because it's taking away some of that detail. So let's go into the masking options. Let's use Mask AI. Let's choose sky, and we'll paint it out from the sky. And there's a little area where it missed up there, so we'll just paint that away to sort of clean it up. And I'm digging it. Remember, with the photo filter, you can always use this polarizing option as well to increase contrast within the photo. So within photo filter, we've adjusted the brightness of sort of our foreground section there by using skylight. Let's talk about another filter that's amazing for styling and giving your image a unique look, and that is the Luts filter. The Luts filter is essentially a style filter. It's basically just there to bring out some unique looks and unique styles within your scene. And one thing I like to use it for in landscapes is to adjust the contrast and even the color sometimes. So let's add a filter, and let's add that fifth filter for any photo, the Luts filter. Now you may be thinking, well, I've used the Luts filter and it is pretty intense on some images. Well, yeah, the Luts filter is quite intense. It's basically a color grading filter, and it's going to really strongly modify the colors within your scene, especially if you get into some of these other more intense ones. However, one thing I'd recommend doing before you get too deep into the Luts filter is I would recommend going into this More menu, and again, just place your cursor over one of the Luts, and then just use your arrow keys to arrow up through these different looks within the scene. Now, some of them may not look great on this particular landscape, but they may look great on other images that you're modifying. Especially if you're looking to adjust an image into a black and white style, the Luts filter has some really amazing and epic black and white styles for your images that can really apply just a quick, breathtaking look into the scene. Now, another thing that I like to use the Luts filter for, other than just sort of styling the entire scene right out of the gate, is I like to go in and either modify the tonal contrast with the Luts filter or strictly adjust the color within the scene. So to demonstrate that, let's actually head into the gear icon here. And to modify the tonal contrast within the scene and sort of the exposure and things like that with the Luts filter, we're going to go into our mode and we're going to head down to luminosity. With luminosity, this blend mode is going to take this Luts filter and essentially it's going to say, hey, I don't want any of the color modifications. I just want that tonal adjustment with the exposure and the contrast, things like that. So you can see here, if I go into even my category and I choose black and white, it's not actually converting my image to black and white, but rather it's taking the tonal adjustments from these specific Luts here. And if I scroll down through these, it's just bringing in, again, those tonal adjustments. So this is a great option for those who are trying to protect their colors within their scene, but want maybe a little bit of a punch or maybe even a matte look within their photo. Same thing with my category of color grading. If I go through these, it's not actually adjusting the color within the photo. It's really just modifying the overall tonal contrast, exposure, and things like that. Now, let's say you're looking to modify just the color and you don't want to adjust the tonal contrast or exposure. You basically just want the LUT for its color. To do that, we're going to go into our mode and we're going to head down to the color blend mode. So the color blend mode is basically the opposite of luminosity. Remember, luminosity is going to avoid any of that color modification within our LUTs filter. And with the color blend mode, that's going to avoid any of that tonal adjustment. And it's strictly going to say, hey, LUTs filter, I just want the color within this look. I don't want any of that tonal contrast or exposure adjustment. I just want to take the color from that style. So we've chosen the mode color here, and watch as I go into my category, and let's just go to color pop. So you can see with color pop here, I've chosen that blues for my color pop, and you can see if I turn this off and on, it's not actually modifying any of the tones. It's not brightening anything up or modifying the contrast. It's just taking those blues from the LUTs and it's placing it into the scene. I'll do the same thing in my LUT menu, and watch as I go through these different LUTs here. It's not actually adjusting the tones. It's just placing that color within the photo. Now again, some of those aren't really going to look that great in some specific photos because they are quite intense. But if we go into the color grading option here and we go through some of these LUTs, we can get some really awesome, just unique colors within the photo without modifying the overall tones or exposure. Especially with that, that morning person one, that warmth works really nice in a lot of landscapes, especially if you're bringing in more of that, again, sort of summertime feel. And another way you can use it is if you're applying black and white, but you don't want to modify any of the tones. You just want to convert the image to black and white with that particular color style. So we'll go into the category and let's choose black and white. And again, watch as I go through these. We're not actually adjusting the tone. We're just modifying the color within the scene. So that is the Luts filter. And remember, when you're applying it to a varied group of images here, I'd recommend going into your blending options and playing around with the color and luminosity blend modes. So for this image here, I think I'm just going to go back to the color option there. Let's go into our category. Let's use color grading. And I think I'm going to go down to that insight option. I think that worked really nice there. I think it just tames some of those brighter blues and just makes everything a little bit more consistent there. Very, very subtle, but I really enjoy what it's doing to just, again, tame some of those blues within the scene. So let's hit the backslash key on our keyboard. This is the original, and this is the after with those different filters applied to it. And remember, we can always go in and readjust any of these different filters to fine-tune our image or fine-tune that look. You can also modify and add in more of these specific filters. You know, if you're digging this look that you've created so far, but you want it to be a little bit more warm, go in and add another photo filter and warm it up a bit. You can add as many of these filters as you want onto the scene, so don't be afraid to get creative with stacking different filters and seeing what looks great in that particular photograph that you're modifying. All right, so that's our landscape here. Let's jump into a wildlife photograph, and I'll show you how to use these 5 filters in a wildlife edit. So with our wildlife photograph here, I've just gone in and modified the Develop tab a little bit. It was a little bit bright within the water there. And so I just evened out some of the exposure within the scene. So now let's go into the Effects tab and let's get on to those filters. And we're going to apply them in sort of the same order. We'll start with Dynamic Contrast, we'll do Glow, Color Enhancer, Photo Filter, and then Luts. So we'll add a filter. Let's go into the animal there, and let's use a nice bit of Dynamic Contrast. And I'm just going to use Surreal. I know it's a bit intense, but remember, I want you guys to see the before and after, sort of the difference, and you can always sort of modify that opacity or these other styles to fine tune and fit your photograph. But I'm really digging it there. I think it really brings in a lot of pop and texture into the bear. And so what I want to do now is I'm going to go into the Effects tab. We've applied that detail. Let's add a filter, and this time let's add Glow. But this time I'm going to use background so that it targets the background behind our animal. Let's choose Glow there. And let's go into darker. I really love what it does to just sort of dim things down and add this sort of softness to the background behind our animal. Let's continue on our journey here. Let's go in, we'll add a filter. And let's add Color Enhancer. With Color Enhancer, the one thing I want to do with this Color Enhancer filter, sort of more than anything else, is just remove this blue color cast on the water. So to do that, let's head down into our color range. Let's go to the blues, and let's just pull those all the way back. We really don't have many blues within the scene. If we want to add any in, we could increase that saturation a bit, but I don't think we really need any. I like that pure white there in the water. I think it's looking a lot more natural, and it sort of focuses the attention on the bear there. But while we're in it, we might as well modify some of the other colors. So let's bring down these yellows to dim down these colors within the rock. Same thing with greens and our oranges there. So if we turn this off and on here, it's looking great. But because we pulled back on the oranges there, we actually took the color away from our bear. So let's go into the masking options, Mask AI, Animal, Paint Out, Apply. And we're back. Let's just lower the opacity a little bit to maybe bring back some of those colors. but I'm really enjoying that neutral look on the water rather than that blue color cast. So we'll continue on here. Let's add a filter and let's add the photo filter. Now with the photo filter, one thing I really enjoy using the photo filter for animals with, if that makes sense, is to bring in a little bit of contrast and warmth into their fur. So to do that, we're going to head into the More menu and let's go down to Tobacco. If we choose Tobacco there, it's going to bring in sort of this brownish warm color there into the scene, and it works really great for the fur on animals. And if we turn this off and on, and we head into just sort of the look of the bear here, we'll zoom out maybe a hair. But if we turn this off and on, just bringing in a little bit of contrast and a little bit of warmth there. But let's go into the photo filter and let's increase that polarizer so that we can really get some nice sort of warmth and contrast in our bear. Oops, zoom out there. And so this is looking great, but I don't really like how it's applied to the entirety of the scene. So let's go into our masking options, use Mask AI, Animal, and we'll choose Paint In this time to strictly apply that to the bear. And if we turn this off and on, I really, really love that tobacco with a little bit of polarizer there. It just works amazing on the fur of that bear to give it a little bit more life and a little bit more punch. Now remember, you can always mask anything away, and I'm seeing that the sort of paw here and his face are a little bit too dark for my liking. So I'm going to hit B on the keyboard, and I'm just going to use sort of a soft opacity there, and I'm just going to paint that away from his face and maybe that paw right there. So if we turn that off and on, there we go. We can see a little bit more of that face, but we still have the majority of his fur nice and warmed up. So we have our 4 filters there. We have dynamic contrast applied to the bear, glow for the background, color enhancer to dim down the blues and the oranges and the greens and yellows. And then we have this photo filter for really increasing that contrast and warmth within our bear. And I may actually go in here to the photo filter itself and increase just a little bit of the amount there. Perfect. And so we'll just continue on here. I'm going to add a filter, and I'm actually going to use the background option again. And you guessed it, we're going right in order, so we're going to use Luts. One of my favorite things for Luts, other than applying a style to, the entirety of the scene, is I like to use it for backgrounds within either portraits or wildlife images. Now, when you're modifying wildlife images, typically you want it a bit more natural. So what I like to do is I like to head into my category and I'll choose color grading. And if we go through these different LUTs here, we're just going to go through until we find one that sort of dims down the area behind our animal. And I'm thinking that Elton one is actually working pretty great for that. But let's see if there's any other better ones. Nope, let's go to Elton. So we'll choose that there. And if we turn this off and on, you can see it's doing a really great job of just bringing in sort of a nice, maybe even grungy feel to the background behind our bear. That way we can really just sort of focus our attention on the bear itself. Now, one thing I'd recommend doing here is bringing in a little bit of the life into the water surrounding the bear. Not all of it, but just enough to where you can get some of those whites, not true whites, but some of these whites in the water coming through to give your scene just a little bit more oomph and pop. But if I turn off the LUTs here, again, doing a great job of just dimming things down that we need to be sort of dimmed down there. So things are looking great. Let's just hit the backslash key on the keyboard there. And it's looking awesome. I see over here there's this part where the masking wasn't sort of picking up. So what I'm going to do to just fix that is just crop in there. Probably wanted to crop a little bit anyway on the bear. And again, with all of these filters, so we'll just turn these off. This is the original, or at least with just the developed settings on it. And then we have dynamic contrast for the bear, glow for the background, color enhancer to dim down the background's color, photo filter for the warmth and contrast on the bear, and then the Luts to just bring it all in with that sort of dim background, almost acting as a vignette, if you will. Just pull the Luts back a little bit. But if we view all of this at 0, and then all of it at 100, I'm really digging the outcome, and I'm really enjoying that look of the bear within this scene that we've created. Let's jump into a portrait, and I'll show you how you can use these 5 filters in a portraiture edit. So with our portrait here, I'm gonna do the same thing I did with the landscape. I'm gonna head into my tone and color first. Let's just use that ON1 neutral, just so that we can see some of those darker tones within the photo. So let's go into the effects tab. We'll start out the same way we did the last two. We'll go and add a filter. We'll target the subject within our scene, which is the person here. So we'll choose people there. Let's choose dynamic contrast. And when it comes to portraiture, typically you don't want detail, or especially a lot of detail, applied to the skin. So what we're going to do here is we're going to remove this from her skin by just hitting B on the keyboard, and I'm just going to mask this away from her face. That way, we just have the detail applied to her clothes there, and we can still get her popping and standing out in the frame so that she's not just flat. So I'm going to use Surreal here, but I'm going to pull the opacity back quite a bit. Again, you can modify this to your liking, but I just want you guys to be able to see the before and after there of what I'm doing. So I'm really enjoying what it's doing to the clothes there. They're a little bit too strong, but we can always readjust. So now let's just move on. And again, we got to add our glow filter. So we'll add a filter, background, glow. We'll use that darker preset there, but remember there's always a bunch of other ones that you can use if you're looking to play around with these different styles. But one of my favorites is darker there. It just gives it a nice glow without being too intense. It's one of my favorite styles. Looking great there, and it's just applied to the background. I may pull up on the amount just a little bit more. Just like that. So we'll continue on, we'll add another filter, and we're on to color enhancer now. So let's go to color enhancer. Inside of color enhancer, what I really want to do here is I want to dim down the colors in the background there and also modify their saturation a little bit. So let's go into the greens here, and we'll just pull back on the brightness there. Do the same thing with the yellows and then some of these oranges. Now keep in mind that when you're modifying oranges, just like with the bear photograph, you're typically modifying some of those colors within your subject. So with this color enhancer filter, let's just hit B on the keyboard. Let me increase that opacity on my brush, and let's just mask this away from her face there. That way we maintain the look, but we can dim down those colors in the background. One thing I actually may do with my yellows here is I may increase the saturation just a little bit to give the background a little bit more life there. But with just this color enhancer filter, it's doing a really great job of just dimming down the background a little bit more and ensuring those colors aren't distracting to the viewer. So we'll continue on here. Let's add a filter, and we're on to the photo filter. So I'm going to use the photo filter to enhance the look of the person. So I'll choose people and then photo filter. And we're going to use one of my favorites, which we used in the first edit, which is skylight. With skylight there, remember it brightens things up, and I'm just going to use it to bring in a little bit more brightness into the subject. And then if we need contrast, we always have that polarizer there to achieve a little bit more contrast. So there's a little area right here on the left where it's modifying it. So I'm just going to be on the keyboard and we'll just get rid of that. But I'm digging it. So one last filter to add, and that is the Luts filter. And with the Luts filter, you could use the Luts filter to style the entire image, or you could use it on the background of the photograph. I'm just going to add the Luts filter and start sort of playing around with styles and see if I actually want it applied to the entire photograph or if I want it applied selectively. So I'm actually going to go into color grading. Color pop's a little bit too intense, but some of these color grading options are really nice for just bringing in a quick look into your portrait. Now I was noticing with this option there, I really enjoy what it's doing to the background, but it's sort of brightening her up in an awkward way. So let's just go in there and we'll use this Luts option for our background, and I'll just paint it away from the person. So the Luts is actually looking quite nice to just bring in, again, sort of a grungy feel to the background, but it's a little bit too intense. So let's just pull back on the opacity there. But I'm digging it. It brings in a nice warmth, and I think it desaturates just a little bit more of those colors back there. Sweet. So again, we'll just go through these. We have dynamic contrast, bringing out the detail within her clothes. Glow for the background to dim it down. Color enhancer to adjust the brightness and saturation of the background colors. We then have photo filter, which is illuminating the person. And then the Luts to finalize that background and give it a stylistic feel. If we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, started with this, and with that ON1 neutral, and then just 5 of those filters, we have this photograph. So that was how to use those 5 filters in a portrait. Let's jump into a macro edit, and I'll show you how you can bring to life a macro image using these filters. So with our macro photograph here, we're not actually going to modify anything in Develop. I think it's exposed well enough to jump right into the filters. So let's go into Effects, and we'll start with Dynamic Contrast. Now with Dynamic Contrast here, I'm not actually going to use the AI masking simply because there's a whole lot of different elements in here, and I actually want to use my own brush to paint in the detail. So let's just add Dynamic Contrast, and again, I'm going to use Surreal. But because I want to paint it in selectively, I'm going to go into the masking options and invert that mask. And then I can use my masking brush to just paint this into the regions where I need it to be applied to. Now, pro tip here with these straighter lines that you're trying to brush into, if I just view my mask here, actually let me paint that in a little bit more. But if we're trying to create a straight line, all we have to do is drop a brush stroke and then hold down Shift and drop another one. And we can continue that, so on and so forth, to create straight lines or patterns within our scene. You can also do the same thing, but with increasing your brush size, and that will create a nice sort of cone shape if you need it. But I'm going to use that method for these straighter lines here. So I'm just going to drop a brush stroke there, hold down Shift, and I can just continue on and paint in that detail really easily into those straighter lines of my macro. I'll then just brush the detail into these parts of the flower there. And the detail's looking nice. Let's continue on here. Let's add a filter, and let's add the glow filter. And I'm going to use the glow filter again for my background. If I enable that there, it's working really nice for the background, but it's just muddying up that detail that I've applied a little bit too much. So let's go into the mask that we just created for our dynamic contrast filter. I'll copy that mask, go into the glow filter, paste the mask, and then invert it. That way it's applied to the background. So let's continue on the journey here. We'll add another filter and we'll use color enhancer. With color enhancer, I'm actually going to head down to the color range and I want to modify the greens a bit. I'm going to choose greens and let's just dim those greens down a little bit to add in a little bit more mood into the scene. And things are looking great with those 3 filters applied. And so from here, with the other 2 filters, photo filter and Luts, I think this is one of those situations where you probably don't need both. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the photo filter, I'll create a snapshot, and then I'll use the Luts. And then you can compare those 2, or you can see which one of those filters works best for that particular image that you're going for. So let's start out with the photo filter. And in photo filter, let's just use the more menu here and let's navigate through these and see if we can't find one that we like within the image. Ooh, polarizer actually looks pretty nice. So let's just use polarizer. It's a little bit intense there, so we'll pull it down, but I really do enjoy just sort of that nice punch of contrast. So let's create a snapshot here. We'll just name this punchy color. And then we'll exit out of that photo filter and we'll add the Luts filter. And in Luts, let's say we want to use a black and white look for our macro image here. We'll find a nice black and white style. I actually kind of like that halide one. So we've found our style there. And let's go up and create a snapshot and we'll just name this black and white. Well, now we have 2 different styles to choose from within our snapshots, and we can navigate between the 2 really easily just by selecting them. So let's say we really like the punchy color one. We can export that, send it off, maybe share it, or we can check out that black and white one to see if we actually need the color within the scene. Whatever the look that you're going for, it's really easy to sort of fine-tune and view both of those once you've modified them. But those are those 5 filters on a macro image. And remember, I don't think this image really needed both the Luts and the photo filter. You may find yourself just using one of those 5 filters within your scene. But just know that they're really great for sort of any image that you're modifying. Let's jump into one last edit here, and I'll show you how to use these 5 filters in just one last quick modification to an edit. So with our last photo here, let's modify sort of an action shot, and we'll use these 5 filters to fine-tune the look of this scene. So first things first, let's just crop this just a little bit, and we're also going to level it to ensure that things just look a little bit more natural there. So next thing, I'm going to use the Develop tab for just one modification, and you guessed it, we're going to use ON1 Neutral. So we can see a lot more of the surfer here, and things are looking great, but I think we need to bring in some style. So to apply style here, let's actually use Super Select AI. We've been doing it by going into Effects and then adding a filter and using the AI masking here, but let's just use Super Select AI by hitting K on the keyboard, and we can just hover over these different sections. So we'll start with the surfer here. I'm gonna right click, we'll bring in some detail into him with texture enhancer. So if I turn this off and on, a lot more detail on our surfer there. Let's actually just pull up on the shadow slider so that we can see some of those darker tones. Hit K on the keyboard again, and let's hover over this right section here. Actually, just real quick, before we hover over that, let me just show you real quick what I'm thinking. So if I hold down J on my keyboard here, I have a lot of blowout there within that building. And I also have sort of a dim, just boring sky that I want to look better. So let's use K on the keyboard to grab both those sections. We'll right click and let's add a really dark glow. Let's use this dark glow option there. And we can bring in a nice sort of bit of color and also some contrast into that section. And if I hold down the J key on my keyboard, it's taken away all of that blowout. Let's just make sure the opacity isn't too intense here. We just want enough. And I'm also going to go up to my masking options and I'm going to feather this mask to get rid of that abrupt edge up top there. So with our glow, we've modified the sky and the buildings there. Let's use K again to grab this wave section here. We're going to use the photo filter on our wave. So I'll right click. Let's go to photo filter and let's use skylight. The wave is looking a little bit dark there and we can't really see these nice little details in there. So let's use that skylight photo filter. We'll increase some of the brightness and then make sure we have some contrast there. And then let's just feather it again to ensure we don't have an abrupt edge. And so with that photo filter applied there, if we turn all of these off and on, we have our detail for the surfer, glow for the buildings and the sky, and then our photo filter for that water there. Let's add the next filter in line here, which is the color enhancer filter. And with color enhancer, what I really want to do in here is just go down to the blues, and I'm just going to brighten those up a little bit. Just to give us a little bit more life in here and also in this bottom section. I'm also going to head over here to aqua, which is basically this sort of green section there. And let's brighten that up just a little bit. So with our color enhancer, we're just brightening up sort of the blues and those aqua tones there. Let's actually go into those blues and let me give it a little bit more range so that it targets some more of those other blue tones. But I'm digging it. I think it's looking great so far. Let's add one last filter here. And this is sort of when you may or may not want to add on the Luts filter on top, especially if you're going for a more natural look. But with these types of images, especially with sort of surfer images or beachy images, one of my favorite Luts to apply if we add the Luts filter is if we go into our color grading option, and in the LUT menu here, it is called Iced. And you can already see just this beautiful color that just really works well with this sort of ocean feel. Now, keep in mind that with LUTs, they are quite intense, especially if you're applying them to the entire photograph. So I'd highly recommend just maybe playing around with the opacity there to adjust and see how much of it you want within the photo. But I think it's looking really great so far. Let's just hit the backslash key on the keyboard. This is the original. And this is after with those different modifications. So let's go through them here. We have, again, dynamic contrast for detail on the surfer, glow for the sky and the buildings, photo filter for brightening up those different tones, color enhancer for brightening up the blues and the aqua, and then our LUTs for incorporating that iced color grading into the scene. So again, it's the dynamic contrast filter, glow filter, photo filter, the color enhancer filter, and LUTs. Those are my top 5 filters for any photograph. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about using those filters in your imagery. Stay tuned for the next lesson and have fun editing.